Welcome to Concert 101, a short introduction to the music coming up in the next concert by the Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra. It's a concert titled CHERUBINI Requiem, and that work, the Mass for the Dead by 18th, 19th century composer Luigi Cherubini, occupies the second half of the program. In the first half, we have Signal Lost, which is a new work by Perth-based composer James Ledger, and the Symphony No. 4 by Ludwig van Beethoven. The conductor of the concert is Elena Schwarz, and she's going to join me for a chat in about 5 minutes or so. But in the meantime, let's get some background on the music. Signal Lost, which was commissioned by the Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra and receives its world premiere in this concert, is a meditation on isolation and disconnection. Composer Ledger says that when he began to formulate ideas for this piece, his thoughts centred around Beethoven's hearing loss and the implications of that condition for a composer and performer. Let's not forget that Beethoven was a professional pianist. But closer to home, isolation and disconnection became very real for many of us during the recent pandemic, with restrictions on social activities, lockdowns and the like. As James Ledger puts it, there were parallels between Beethoven's condition and pandemic life. Signal Lost is to do with the moment communication fails. Given that this is a new piece, I can't tell you much about it, or I can't say much in any detail, so let's pick it up a little bit later with conductor Elena Schwarz, who's been studying the score. The second work on the program is Beethoven's Fourth Symphony. I don't know about you, but if I was asked to hum the main theme of the opening movement of the Fourth, I'd have trouble recalling it. Beethoven's Fourth suffers from being overshadowed by the more assertive and more famous symphonies on either side of it, the Third and the Fifth. This is a shame, because the Fourth has lots to recommend it. The Fourth commences with a long and searching slow introduction marked adagio, after which the main theme bursts forth, which sounds like this. You can see what I mean about the difficulty in humming that theme. There's no singable melody as such, but rather a thematic complex that takes in harmony, small melodic fragments, and above all, rhythm. Beethoven's Seventh Symphony is often singled out for its rhythmic vitality, but it seems to me that it's a very strong feature of the Fourth too. But don't imagine that the Fourth is devoid of tunes. That's not true at all. In fact, you'll notice that Beethoven gives many of them to the woodwinds. The second movement, Adagio, is particularly impressive. It's grand in its dimensions, lasting for nearly 10 minutes, and broad in its sweep. This is no dreamy, slow movement, but rather an altogether more complex proposition, with cantabile melodies on the one hand and great churning episodes on the other. The third movement, marked Menuetto, is actually a scherzo. It runs at a clip and makes much use of syncopated rhythms, while the contrasting trio brings the woodwinds to the fore. The symphony comes to a close with an exhilarating finale that's very nearly a moto perpetuo, that is, a piece that proceeds almost by continuous, rapid figuration. After interval, we have the longest work on the program, the Requiem by Cherubini, who was an Italian-born Frenchman. Cherubini was 10 years older than Beethoven, and he enjoyed success around the time of the French Revolution, composing so-called rescue operas. These are operas where a rescue forms a key part of the plot. Cherubini's rescue model was a powerful influence upon Beethoven's one and only opera Fidelio, and we know that Beethoven was an admirer of Cherubini's music. Cherubini's career had its ups and downs, and in later years veered towards sacred music, which is where the Requiem comes in. Cherubini wrote it in 1816 for a commemorative mass for Louis XVI, who was guillotined in 1793. With the restoration of the French monarchy in 1814, the royal house was keen to project continuity with the past, papering over the Revolution and the Napoleonic period. So, Cherubini's Requiem places us very explicitly at the intersection of music and politics, or more correctly, music, religion and politics. The Requiem was composed to the memory of someone who had been dead for nearly 25 years. It was a state-sanctioned memorial, and the premiere, which took place in the crypt of the Basilica Cathedral of Saint-Denis in 1817, was pure statecraft. Saint-Denis, outside Paris, had been the traditional resting place of French kings since the 10th century. And so it was on the 21st of January in 1817, on the 24th anniversary of the king's execution, that Cherubini's Requiem played its part in shoring up royalist sentiment. Not surprisingly, this is a very solemn piece of music. There are no soloists, unlike, say, the Mozart Requiem, Cherubini instead opting for a collective expression of mourning. Dark instrumental registers and colours predominate in the first two of the 7 movements. The third movement, the Dies Irae, this Day of Wrath, or Judgment Day, is traditionally the most dramatic movement in a Requiem, and it's announced here by a brass fanfare and tam-tam crash. A tam-tam is a large gong. The ending is particularly effective, with Cherubini stripping everything back and having the voices intone single notes. It's a simple idea, but striking and powerful in an understated way. So, there's a brief overview, but let's now bring conductor Elena Schwarz into the discussion. Elena, thank you so much for coming on. From your study of the score, what can you tell us about the first piece in the concert, Signal Lost by James Ledger?
It's actually a piece that has a strong connection to Beethoven. And initially, when I received the score, I kind of assumed it was part of the many new works that saw light in 2020 around the celebration, of course, of Beethoven. But actually, it was not, and that's so interesting in this work to find out a little bit more about what its genesis was. It happened very much around James Ledger going to a concert, hearing a Beethoven symphony, I believe it was the third, and connecting that to what we were all going through in 2020, which was, of course, a pandemic, and the experience of reflecting on Beethoven's hearing loss and that sense of isolation that the composer must have felt. And then, of course, I looked at the score with that in mind. And what I discovered was a score where the composer is dealing with perception, and perception of what this sense of isolation can mean. There is a moment where he indicates it's like very slow breath. So there's this real feel of orchestrating these feelings, these sensations. And there's also a study of the idea of focus, small fragments coming into focus and then disappearing from focus. So I find that to be a very atmospheric piece on paper, and I can't wait to start to rehearse it with the orchestra.
It sounds fascinating. And of course, the second piece on the programme is a piece by Beethoven.
Yes, of course.
So we go from a piece that sort of has Beethoven as an inspiration at some point to Beethoven's fourth. I suppose it's probably fair to say that it's overshadowed by the symphonies on either side of it. But if you were to build a case for the fourth, what would you say? What for you are the strengths of this work?
I like to think in Beethoven's over about the first, second, fourth, eighth symphony. They're all somehow in that category. They're a little bit less performed. And of course, those are the symphonies where Beethoven is more dialoguing with the symphonic tradition before him. And especially heritage of Beethoven and Haydn, which is so important in this fourth symphony. And somehow, to ask ourselves, well, would we have the odd number symphony if we didn't have the even number ones? It's this kind of dialogue. We feel in these works he's really stretching what the classical symphony could be in every sense, in form, in themes, in expression. And that's why what I find so special in this fourth symphony is that we have that idea of lightness, and we have all of that classical feeling, but also very much Beethoven because of this incredible stretching that is happening. And with a lot of humor. I like at the end of the scherzo, well, it's called minuet, but it's actually very much a scherzo. That we have it concludes, well, it repeats already once more than we're used to, like it will in the seventh. And then there's wink, when you have the horns playing at the end. Or you have the opening of the first movement, you have this chord, and this held harmony, and you never resolve until actually then actual exposition happens. So he's really playing, like in the first piece actually, playing very much with our expectations and with our perception, and he's giving us a lot of fun on the ride.
And of course, after interval, we have the main work on the programme, I suppose, the Requiem in C minor by Luigi Cherubini. You know, requiems are often written for the church, or originally they were, of course. I mean, pieces of sacred music, but some of them are explicitly written for the concert hall, and you kind of think they're of, I suppose, the Verdi Requiem above all. This one, of course, was written for the church, but it's being performed in concert. Does that present any challenges to you as a conductor to sort of to bring some shape to the piece, for it to hang together as a concert work when it originally wasn't written as such?
Yes, of course. It's a really interesting question. I mean, Cherubini, he was active in France, and he fell into kind of a little bit disregard during the French Revolution with Napoleon. Napoleon famously didn't really like his music. And then with the Restoration, all of a sudden, all of those pre-revolutionary composers were rediscovered. And Cherubini, we know, was appointed to a very prestigious job. And he was given a task that was such a difficult task, I find, for a composer, to compose a requiem to commemorate the fallen nobles and monarch during the revolution, but also to celebrate the return of the remains that had been desecrated during the revolution, to commemorate the fact that they would be re-entombed in the Basilica of Saint-Denis. So it was, I mean, such a very special occasion, and it must have felt very profound as a moment in history. And Cherubini was given this difficult task, and he was also said, please do not compose something that is too long. And in fact, it gives this indication in the score. It is, I think, 35 minutes and a half it should be, which usually we associate with like 20th century music. No, famously Bartók or Ligeti will write that.
To the minute.
To the minute, exactly, to the minute. When we hold that all in mind, that was the occasion, extremely solemn, that it was a celebration of more than 3 hours in Saint-Denis, which is this huge basilica outside Paris. Then we can imagine, oh, that's somehow, how do you say, very difficult space, those 35 and a half minutes to fill.
Yes.
So that is what we are giving here in concert, and we are giving, as you say, in a very, very different atmosphere, but I think we need to set it up in that way to know what that occasion was.
It's solemn.
And imbued with history, and with this very specific commemoration of something that had been very recent for them at the time. I think we can hear in this work, and I think that's why it works so well in the concert hall, Cherubini's huge ability as a composer who come from the opera world to create colors, to create contrasting atmospheres, to create theater in this sacred music. And that went on to influence, I mean, so many composers. We think of Berlioz only 20 years later, composing his Requiem. And Berlioz famously adored this work, as did Beethoven, which creates, of course, the thematic connection. And I think something that Berlioz said about this Requiem was the first thing that made me love this piece, and it was not the last. But I would invite really the audience to look forward to that moment, is the very end, the Agnus Dei. Agnus Dei is composed like a huge diminuendo, and the end finishes incredibly softly. And I like to imagine that's really the power of the composer in this monumental occasion, to get everyone to be very still for a moment. And I think that is somehow something that we can really equally enjoy in the concert hall, that moment of communion and of finishing with that silence. That I really look forward to that in the concert.
It just dissipates.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Elena, thank you so much for coming in. I know that you've got a very busy week, so time is precious, but so also are your insights. So thank you very much for
Robert.
Sharing them with us. That brings Concert 101 to an end. I hope you feel prepped for the concert and that you'll join us next time, but bye for now.